Welcome! In this video we're going to be looking at Lillia, an epic grade healer class Elune. This is going to be one of the healers that some people might get early on, or that they're going to be fighting and going through adventure right at the beginning, as she's going to be in the first adventure maps and you'll be fighting against her or finding her early on. So this might be an early healer that people will have access to. So looking at her base stats at 6-star, her HP at 27.6 is not too bad. Her attacks at 4k. Her PDEF and MDEF is a little bit higher than most for epics, being at 3k apiece. Her attack speed's at 107, which puts her about on around the higher side of the mid-range, but still in the mid-range area. When she is transcended up to the max at +5, her HP does go up to a pretty decent 41.4k, with her attack at 6.6. Her PDEF and MDEF go up to 4.5k apiece, which isn't too bad for an epic, making her a little bit easier to build tanky. And since she is a supporter healer Elune, you're going to need her somewhat tanky for that. Let's go ahead and look at her skills. Her first skill is a typical healer type skill, meaning that it does either damage to any target as magic, or it will heal in a ally by whatever the stat is. When the skill is leveled up to the max at +6, the damage that it does is decent, as well as the heal can be quite significant, especially if you have her on a full attack on the primary and offhand weapon. But in most cases you're going to be building her attack on the primary and HP on the offhand to make her a little bit tankier. But because of the scaling of this, the heal will still do really well, even with an HP in the offhand. The special skill that she has takes 4 souls and is somewhat underwhelming, but not too bad nonetheless because of her passive. What this does is it puts a barrier on an ally that absorbs damage. The barrier is quite decent at a 190 plus 188% of her attack, so it is quite decent even at level 1. It only lasts for 2 turns, but the skill can be spammed. Even though it takes 4 souls, it does take quite a bit to put this, and it is only a single ally. However, once the skill is leveled up to the max at +6, the barrier does go up by a significant amount, so this barrier can be quite nice, and it lasts for 3 turns, so it is a way to protect an ally from death or something just by putting a barrier on them. Her ultimate skill is another barrier, but this is also a damaging skill. This is an AoE attack doing damage to all enemies by 95 plus 94% of her attack at level 1, and the barrier is a pretty decent 190 plus 188% of her attack, and that absorbs for 2 turns. However, when the skill is maxed at +6, the damage goes up to a pretty decent 670 plus 100 and almost 130% of her attack as magic damage, but the barrier goes up to a pretty high 1340 plus 259% of her attack for 3 turns, making the barrier pretty significant and somewhat tough to get through. If her attack is high enough, say if she has an attack buff, then this barrier will be quite significant and difficult to get through for the enemy team. Now, looking at her passive, what she does on this one is that if she uses a skill that consumes a soul, meaning her special skill or ultimate skill, then she will heal herself by 10% of her max HP. So whenever she uses her special or ultimate skill to either put a barrier on an ally or herself, or she uses the ultimate skill to put barriers up, she heals herself. This is a way to help herself sustain, so that you don't have to necessarily trade off between healing herself and putting a barrier up. If she is in danger or she is getting low on HP, you can still apply the barrier to your team, and she can still heal herself by a little bit of HP just because of the passive. Now, her second passive, what this one does is this is a damage reduction that happens. If there's a barrier on your team, or anybody who has a barrier that is granted by her, whenever that barrier takes damage and then is done, so whenever it goes away, they gain a enhance buff that reduces the damage they receive by 5% for 2 turns. This makes them a little bit tankier and adds a little bit of a way to reduce the damage that they take by a little bit. 5% isn't a lot, but it can still be somewhat helpful, or it could, you know, make your Elune survive a hit just because of that little bit of damage reduction that it takes. So it is something that's there that once the barrier is gone, they still have a little bit of protection by reduced damage for 2 turns, and then they can get that barrier back up again. Her third passive, now this is really where the healing part of her being a healer comes in, because so far the only thing that heals with her is her passive 1 that heals herself, and then her normal skill that is a single target heal. So this is the third passive is where her actual healing comes in. Now what this one does is this heals a target that has her barrier by 5% of their max HP as soon as they get a turn. Now it's when they get a turn, not when she gets a turn. So every time that an Elune that has one of her barriers gets a turn, they get healed by 5% of their max HP. And so this is done based on max HP, and it's based on each Elune. It's not based on her attack or her barrier or anything else based on her. It's just if they have her barrier, they get a turn. They get healed by 5% of their HP as soon as they get a turn. So this is really where her healing effect comes in, is there, because this means that the team is constantly healing themselves by 5% of their HP every time they get a turn, in addition to her normal skill being able to provide a pretty decent heal to them. Looking in at the skill gems for her now, on her first skill, this increases the crit rate of the skill Sprout, which is the name of the skill, by 3%. Now this skill is a magic attack, or it's also a healing. So blue, green, green is what it is, and then you can increase the crit rate by 3%. This isn't too bad of an option for her, as the primary thing that you're going to be wanting on here is the heals, and you can crit heals, making them even nicer. So having that additional crit rate on this skill means you either do a little bit more damage to the enemy, or you have a little bit better chance of landing a crit heal, which means your heals are even better. So you can go with a 3% crit rate increase and have that chance of getting an additional heal, or you can just go with more green gems instead and have a constant heal. So let's look at, say, a 4-star green gem, which is going to be, you know, a more obtainable one for most people. This one is a 2% increase in healing effects at 4 stars, meaning that if you put this in there instead of the blue gem, the healing is 2% guaranteed all the time. It's always going to be 2% more. So you also, instead, you would have a 3% additional chance of landing a crit, which, depending on your crit damage, then that would determine the additional healing, but for most people it's not going to be that much. If you put a 5-star in there, it's 2.5%. If you put a 6, it's 3%. So you can either go with the guaranteed amount of additional healing by putting a green one in there just to guarantee that, but then you won't be doing as much damage to the enemy or have that crit rate. So it's really up to you which way you want to go. Do you want to use her just for healing on that skill 1, or do you want it to have the ability to crit so that it's useful in just as a damage skill and as a healing skill? For the special skill, the recommended is green, green, violent for the bonus here. The bonus here is, again, a 5% chance of landing and an increasing target's physical defense by 10% for 2 turns. This is a 5% chance, so it's very low to happen. This is a single target only skill, so even if it was AoE, it would still be a pretty low chance, but with this being single target, the 5% chance of this proccing is pretty low. The physical defense increase of 10%, while it's not too bad, is also still not that great. Now this skill, this one is a green, green, violent. Now greens also affect barriers, so this does affect the increase of the barrier amount that they'll have. So going with green violent on here just makes her move a little bit faster from the violent, but if you go with full green, then you just get a little bit better barrier whenever you're applying this, instead of having that chance of increasing the PDEF. So it's really up to you which way you want to go. Do you want that little bit of extra speed and chance to get that PDEF buff, or do you want to go ahead and just go with a better protection for your ally whenever you use this? The same thing kind of applies to her ultimate skill here. This one increases the crit power of the skill by 5%. Now the 5% increase here, it's much better than the 3% on the skill, her normal skill, but it's still not bad. But it's kind of up to you which way you want to go. Now this skill does do an AoE attack to the enemy, so going with the extra damage that it does too with the blue wouldn't be a bad option. Now the other thing on this one is the violence. So this one, unlike the first skill, is blue-green violent, which is magic attack. It's magic attack for the blue, it's healing for the green, which is barrier in this case, and then violent for the speed increase to her, making her move a little bit quicker for her next turn, so that she can cycle her turn back a little bit faster. But that would give you an increase, a 5%. Since this skill does two things, it does damage and it heals, the 5% increase in crit rate could give you a crit barrier, which would mean that your barrier is quite significant on her, which is not a bad thing. So it's not a bad idea to go with that extra crit rate. That way you can have it to have that higher chance of a really thick barrier with this skill, so it makes it really difficult to get through, as at the same time you're having a 5% extra chance of doing more damage to the enemy team. And since this does have a decent multiplier for damage, the skill can hit quite hard. As far as Dimension Slate now goes, or gear in that case, the things you're going to want to focus on for her is going to be like most healers. You're going to need attack, just because her first skill is, her healing is based all on her attack. So you're going to want that because it's going to help the heal, it's going to help the damage of the skill one, but it's also going to help the damage of her other skill, plus the barrier amounts to that attack. So the barriers are all based on her attack, as well as her ultimate skill, which is going to do damage based on her attack, and that. So going with the attack offhand could be decent. So if you want to go with a full like Emperor set here, you can go with the full Emperor set. Now this one isn't too bad, but it is a crit rate increase to healing skills. So since her only healing skill is her first skill, then you don't really get that benefit as much, but it still is a good thing. I'm not sure how if healing skills are included with barrier skills. I know the gems work that way, so I'm not quite sure about the increase there. It would take a lot of testing to see if that crit rate increase is actually there, or somebody else to test it or that knows. But in either case, this kit isn't too bad anyway, just because it can provide her with a little bit decent stats. However, you might be better off going with something else just to provide with guaranteed stats too, which is like the Ulysses set, which is 100% PDEF and MDEF for 2 turns. Whenever she's crit, this gives her a nice little extra buff to to absorb that damage. The other thing that you can do too is you can go with the Corrupt set. This gives her more souls at the end of every other turn. You can go with a 3-piece of this, and that would give her a little bit of extra, basically a little extra souls for your team every other turn that she takes. So that's not a bad option either for her. Try to get the PDEF, MDEF wherever you can get it, because you want her to have at least some decent stats. Crit rate if you can, but I would focus probably on attack, HP, PDEF, MDEF instead. You can go with some speed on her just so she can get those barriers up more often, but all in all, her main heal is just going to be her primary skill. So as a healer, there are better options to her. She is more of a shield type or barrier type Elune than a healer type. So if you're needing something to heal your team, then you're going to want probably a different healer. If you're just needing barriers or something. For like some of the alliance bosses, if you have a barrier, then it allows you to do more damage. If you don't have a barrier, then you don't do as much damage. So if you need something to give barriers to your team, you can either bring a Stella with you, or you can bring the Lillia with you, and you can have those barriers. However, the Stella, whenever the barrier's up, you have an increased attack for your team too, so that allows your team to do more damage. But the Lillia does provide healing as well as barrier, so she can be a little bit better in support that way, providing that extra healing as well as the barrier for your team. However, she wouldn't be useful against certain other boss battles, especially one you wouldn't want to use her just because the boss, I believe it's Iscariot, whenever you have a barrier, if you create a barrier, then the boss will immediately get a turn and do soul damage to your team. And since Lilia's thing is barriers, you would be limited to just spamming skill 1 with her, and that would be it, which is her primary skill, normal skill. You wouldn't be able to use her special or ultimate skill, which means you wouldn't get the passive healing or anything either, because as soon as you put the barrier up, your entire team is just going to take a bunch of damage as soul damage. So you wouldn't want to use her in that against that boss, because she would just kill your team by putting barriers up, which wouldn't save it. It would just kill your team. So you wouldn't want to use her there. But for most other places, the barrier wouldn't be too bad. So starting off, if you're going into the game, for some aspects, having those barriers are going to be pretty helpful because they can be somewhat strong. So if you're needing to protect your team against damage, and you can build her pretty quick to go first, then you can get those barriers up early on, and that'll be absorbing the damage that you're taking. So instead of taking damage, the barrier's just taking it instead. So overall, she's not a great healer, but she does have some usefulness to her. The barriers aren't bad. Her healing is okay. Sadly, it's based on the max HP of your team instead of any type of attack, so the heals are not going to be very significant. The only heal that she does have that's decent is her normal skills heal. Other than that, it's HP percent based, so they're not going to be high. She doesn't do a lot of damage, but she does have an AoE that does damage and shield at the same time, and that's not bad. So she can be useful early on as a damage dealer and support or healer, quasi healer for your team to keep them alive if you're going through the adventure mode first. So if it's the only healer that you have, then she isn't too bad. But I wouldn't invest too much into her, as there are much better healers even for epic grade that are going to be better at doing as healers than she is. So I would look into those instead of her. But having her for the shield just to keep her around, or having her built later on, or having her built early and just kind of keeping her with maybe not 6-starring her, or even 5 stars, and just keeping her there for additional things, or if you need her for certain situations, then it wouldn't be bad. Anyway, that's going to be it for this one. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know, and I'll answer them as soon as I can. Thank you.